And we turn now to our team coverage as we learn more about the suspected shooter at that elementary school in Nashville, sparking a bigger conversation on gun violence and gender. Western Mass News reporter Maria Wilson joining us live in studio with more. Maria?
Chris, tonight officials identified the alleged shooter as 28-year-old Audrey Hale, who identified as transgender. One local professor tells me transgender individuals are more likely to be the victims of violent crimes rather than the suspects, which he says makes today's shooting stand out that much more.
Shortly after 10 o'clock Monday morning, 6 people were fatally shot at the Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee, including 3 students who were all just 9 years old. Nashville police identifying 28-year-old Audrey Hale as the gunman, who is believed to be a former student at the school. Authorities also revealed Hale identified as transgender, something criminal justice professor Craig Dutton says defies common stereotypes of a mass shooter. A staggering 98% of mass shootings are carried out by men, according to Violence Project, which is a research group that tracks mass shootings in the U.S. Dutton offered some insight into the gender divide.
Boys and men are socialized to externalize anger, whereas girls and women are socialized to internalize it. That's why we see more, violent aggression on the part of men. When we're looking, when we're expanding beyond the gender binary, there's not really much information out there as far as how that could impact something like this.
Authorities say they recovered a manifesto inside the suspect's home. Dutton tells us it's common for mass shooters to reveal their thoughts and motives in these types of documents.
A lot of times when we've seen this type of mass shootings where manifestos are involved, it's somebody who's expressing frustration either with society or with whatever they're particularly targeting.
And while the manifesto could shed light into a possible motive, Dutton warns of the dangers that could come from it.
Quite often, whenever one is high profile, there's others, because it's people with, who are feeling similar ways or have similar motives.
Police say they have been in contact with the suspect's father, and a video about the shooting will be released within the coming days. Reporting live in studio, Maria Wilson, Western Mass News.
Maria.